A lot of childcare centers do not fall apart because the buyer changes their mind. They fall apart because the math stops working for them. I'm Brent Delhamer with Childcare Insight. This is one of the biggest realities sellers struggle to understand during a transaction. An owner may believe their center is worth a certain number because of how hard they worked, how long they operated, or another owner supposedly sold nearby. But SBA lenders are not underwriting emotion. They are underwriting risk and cash flow. And when a deal does not pencil for the bank, everything changes very quickly. The difficult part is that many sellers do not realize there is a problem until the buyer is already deep into the escrow. The lender orders financial reviews, tax return analysis, debt coverage calculations, lease reviews, and operational underwriting. That is when the weaknesses start surfacing. And this is where the deals start getting uncomfortable. One of the most common problems is that sellers focus too heavily on gross revenue instead of adjusted cash flow. A center may be generating strong top-line revenue, but if payroll is too high, rent is aggressive, enrollment is unstable, or margins are compressed, the lender starts tightening up immediately. I recently saw a deal where the owner believed the business should command a very strong multiple because enrollment looked healthy. But once the lender started analyzing the trailing 12-month financials, they discovered margins had weakened materially over the prior year. Rising payroll, stagnant tuition increases, and declining profitability changed the entire underwriting picture. The buyer still wanted the school. The lender became the problem. That distinction matters. And there is another issue sellers often misunderstand. SBA lenders are not trying to figure out whether your center is a good school. They're trying to determine whether the future operator can comfortably make loan payments while still surviving operationally. These are two very different conversations. A lender may fully acknowledge that a center has a good reputation, loyal families, strong teachers, while still concluding the debt load is too aggressive relative to cash flow. That is why some deals die even though everyone likes the business. Another major issue is lease structure. I see sellers underestimate this constantly. If a buyer is purchasing the business only and leasing the property, the lender is heavily focused on occupancy cost. If rent is too high relative to revenue, the deal may stop penciling entirely. The crazy part is that sellers often think the lender will simply work around it. They usually do not. I worked on a transaction where the business itself actually performed reasonably well operationally, but the proposed lease terms became a major obstacle. Once annual rent escalations, triple net expenses, and remaining lease terms were analyzed together, the lender determined the future debt burden became too high. Suddenly, the buyer needed more money down. Then the buyer started negotiating. Then, momentum slowed dramatically. This becomes especially dangerous once buyers start spending serious money during due diligence. Appraisals get ordered, attorneys get involved, quality of earnings reviews begin. Buyers become emotionally invested, sellers become emotionally invested. Then the lender pushes back. That is where frustration explodes inside of transactions. And here's another problem that almost nobody talks about. Sometimes the deal technically pencils, but barely. These are often the most fragile escrows. If the lender sees weak debt coverage, they start stress testing everything. They scrutinize enrollment trends, they analyze teacher retention, they review licensing history. They look harder at owner add-backs. They may question future sustainability if enrollment softens, even slightly after closing. But once underwriting becomes fragile, every small issue suddenly becomes more. I've seen buyers lose financing approval because enrollment dropped during escrow. I've seen lenders reduce loan amounts after reviewing updated financials. I've seen buyers forced to inject substantially more cash because the lender became uncomfortable late in the process. Most sellers never anticipate how dynamic underwriting can become, and this creates another important issue. Sophisticated buyers understand underwriting risk before they even make offers. That is why experienced buyers often structure offers more conservatively than inexperienced buyers. They know the lender will eventually dissect every operational and financial detail anyway. Newer sellers sometimes become offended by conservative offers because they think the buyer is trying to take advantage of them. In reality, the buyer may simply understand the bank better. This is why pricing strategy matters enormously in childcare transactions. If a buyer is priced materially above what underwriting can support, you are not creating leverage. You are often creating future escrow problems. A deal that cannot realistically pencil creates instability from the very beginning. And the dangerous part is that many owners do not discover this until months have already been wasted. This is why preparation matters so much before going to market. Clean financials matter. Stable enrollment matters. Reasonable lease structure matters. Payroll efficiency matters. Consistent tuition strategy matters. All of those factors eventually flow into underwriting. Not just buyer interest, underwriting. Your homework is simple. Go look at your center the way a lender would. Pull your trailing 12-month financials, look at payroll percentage, look at occupancy costs, look at debt obligations, look at enrollment trends, and then honestly ask yourself whether a bank would feel comfortable financing your center today at your expected valuation. That question alone changes how many owners think about their business. If you want a confidential discussion about your childcare center or property value, reach out to Childcare Insight.